What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Miko, and today we're actually joined by a special guest. Hamza is actually here, filling in for Morgan, who kind of had a couple things going on today. So, Hamza, I'm really glad that you were able to make time. You and I were talking before this. I saw your tweet about one of the kickers that's kind of here, visiting in Detroit, and I completely kind of missed an opportunity to kind of have you on the YouTube channel and at least talk kickers a little bit because of everybody on the staff, you are probably the most knowledgeable on them and the most invested into when it comes to specialists. So really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
For sure. Thank you for having me, Miko.
Yeah, man. So obviously the draft is this Thursday. We only have a few more days and there's so many topics that I feel like we as a staff haven't gotten to cover. So today we're going to kind of just do a mashup of a number of different things, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with giving you an opportunity to let the fan base know if there are a couple kickers that you are kind of high on that the Lions could potentially look for, possibly in the later rounds, because that's still an area that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's still a need for this team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone was going to say at some point, is this a product of Dan Campbell being aggressive, or is he aggressive because they don't have a kicker with a big leg? But only one way to find out. So I think we'll get our answer in the next couple of days.
For sure. So let's go ahead and kick it off with the first kind of question that I kind of had, for this video is obviously with the draft being Thursday night, there's a lot of different things, different ways that the first round can kind of play out. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion on what do you think could be possibly the best case scenario for the Lions and what could possibly be a worst case scenario with just how the first round could kind of unfold.
Yeah, I mean, as far as best case scenario, I think when you're at 29, a lot of different options are on the table, right? And the best case for me is the Lions find a guy they love and they get him, right? And it doesn't matter
Mhm.
if that's at 10, at 29, at 42, for all I care. I would much rather we put assets on the table, move up for a guy who is going to be a good scheme fit, who's going to maybe not necessarily come in be a starter day one, but who fits your system and fits what you want to do and fits what you want to build. Then you just take a flyer on a guy you're somewhat iffy about at 29, and then someone's to blame when things go awry.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you where I think the best case scenario is ideally like the Lions can either stay pat at 29 and a guy that they love kind of gets overlooked in the same way that it did last year with like the likes of Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, maybe even a Jack Campbell where you're able to kind of stay where you want and allow everyone else to overthink the draft and you are able to just get solid football players. Um I think the flip side of that though, worst case scenario is kind of what happened last year in the same vein with Devin Witherspoon, where maybe you missed that opportunity to be a little aggressive and a player that would fit your scheme perfectly kind of just gets taken right before you're able to pick. And now you're, having to move on to, plan B or plan C, which I don't know with Brad Holmes, like it seems like even his plan Bs and plan Cs are most teams plan As.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we were talking about this before. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. But my guy, everyone loved Devin Witherspoon. My guy was Christian Gonzalez. I think Alex Reno's guy was also Christian Gonzalez. Maybe I'm missing some other guys on staff. But that was a guy who, the Lions trade up. And I'm thinking, all right, is this going to be it? And then he slips at, I think it was 12. And I'm just, it was so close, but so far. And you see
Yeah.
the year, like, he's a very rare case of a corner coming in and excelling in year one. And maybe that's to be attributed to being on a staff like Bill Belichick, where there's a scheme fit, there's a lot of maturity, a lot of, instruction, quality instruction. But at the same time, it's tempting to look back on that and say, like, imagine what he could have done in Detroit, especially knowing what the cornerback situation was throughout the year and knowing what it's like now with a big gap there, especially now with Cam Sutton off the team.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of again, that's what I'm speaking to, like maybe a worst case scenario. It kind of is that where like the Lions, the needs that the Lions have on this roster currently are not groundbreaking by any means. Like I feel much better about this roster going into this draft as I did last draft, but it still feels like, man, like you have an opportunity to upgrade at corner, early. Why not do that? Or you have an opportunity to get a really big impact player at wide receiver. You would hate for that opportunity to just barely like almost be in reach and then it get, kind of pulled out from under them because a team like Buffalo or Tampa, maybe takes a guy right before the Lions get the pick.
Right. And when you talk worst case scenarios too, it's like I would love for best player available for the Lions to be a corner or an edge rusher, right?
Hmm.
Maybe that's the guy who fits them best. But if it is said corner or edge rusher and they go off the board right before the Lions are about to snatch them, maybe the next best player available is another tight end or a linebacker, right? I hope we don't go another tight end that high. But, for example's sake, right? Then you're shooting
Yeah.
yourself into what? You're going to get a third rounder to step in at corner and try and fill that void again for a year. So obviously, I know we trust Brad Holmes to go best player available. He's been adamant all off season that he will, but I do think we're in a sort of different position than years past, where best player available was pretty much guaranteed to be an upgrade at whatever position it was, and now you're at a point where whoever you pick in the first round isn't even guaranteed to be a starter. There's a pretty loaded roster top to bottom.
Yeah, and I might be in the minority here. I'm just like you said. I trust Brad Holmes as much as the next Lions fan, right? But I am getting like a little annoyed with like people just being like, BPA, and it's like, okay, we can be a little we can be a little critical thinking here, guys. Like
Yeah, we
we can
care
at
about
least give an opinion.
the
Yeah, exactly. With that said, though, that kind of moves us into like the next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is obviously whenever you're talking about, if you're drafting high, people want to talk about the possibility of trading down. And if you're drafting low, there's always the talk of possibly trading up, or even in the Lions case, there's still talk about possibly trading down because what if a team like the Raiders or Minnesota or someone like that wants to trade back into the first round?
right.
And so when you look at the Lions and this is just kind of your personal like philosophy right now, going into this draft, are you a little more pro trading up or maybe pro trading down if the Lions have that opportunity?
I was pretty resistant to trading up throughout most of the pre-draft process, but I've really warmed up to it the more I look at the picks Lions have and look at the roster top to bottom, right? Because going
Hmm.
back to what we just touched on, it's the players you're going to get now are not going to be plug and play given the maturity of the Lions roster. So you need to take a swing on a big player. We can't just have, second, third stringers coming in on a full draft. That's not going to make as big of a difference throughout the year. And so, for me, it's like I'm a lot more open to trading up if it means sacrificing, a third, a fourth round pick. I don't know if I'd want one of those, send two firsts to move up 10 picks, but
Yeah.
you got to do, right. The flip side of that, I think if the draft were anywhere other than Detroit, I would be very pro trade down. I think that sweet spot of 28 to 32, where you have those teams, like you said, looking to jump back into the first round happens like every other year. And they sort of overpaid just because of that delineation between day one and day two, where teams have time to think and marinate and trade up to pick one of round two. People will pay a premium for those picks. And any other year, I'd say the Lions are in prime position for that, especially because they have as few picks as they've had in several years now. I think this is the
Mhm.
first year where we don't have the Jared Goff picks anymore. And the caveat is just the draft is in Detroit. If Brad Holmes trades out of the first round, I think the people of Detroit will riot.
I mean, I don't know if they'll riot, but I know like I'm planning on going downtown. I'd be bummed. I'd be like
Right.
legitimately like, oh, I came all the way down here to at least see the first pick. Cause like unfortunately I'm not gonna be able to go down on Friday and Saturday for
Right.
day 2 and day 3. So, it would be great to be amongst the fans and to be able to welcome the Lions first overall pick at 29 or possibly higher. But
Yeah.
that's where I'm kind of with you as well. I think trading down is always appealing because the opportunity to acquire more picks is just what people see.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to have, the Lions don't have a fourth round pick, so I'm sure there's going to be people like, hey, if you can get a fourth, or if you can get an additional second or an additional third, that's even more, bites at the apple for Brad Holmes and this regime. But at the same time, I'm also right there with you where it's like I think there is still some really good talent, that could possibly just not quite make it to the Lions, like how we were just talking about, where, I'm not necessarily saying that the Lions need to do what they did back in what was it, 2022 with Jamison Williams, where they jumped from 32 all the way up to 12 to pick him, but jumping from 29 to maybe like 15 or 16, just so that you have an opportunity to take, one of the better corners if they wanted to go that route, or even if, let's say they want to go offensive line, being able to secure an opportunity to get a guy like JPJ or Graham Barton and not having to worry about those guys being picked up ahead of you because, like you said, these are guys that you like, that you feel that would fit in your system, would fit your culture. This is one of those drafts where I would love to see Brad Holmes just kind of be a little aggressive and go get his guys and not have to worry about, hey, let's just see who falls to us.
Exactly. And of course, the caveat is always you have to consider the price tag. I
Hmm.
was talking with Mansour, who many of you watching Pride of Detroit will remember that name from a few years ago. I was talking with him the other day about the Marcus Davenport trade. Now that Marcus Davenport is on the Lions, New Orleans moved up from 28 to 10 to get him way back when. And that cost them, I think it was 2 firsts and maybe a third or fourth, if I'm remembering correctly. That's a steep
Yeah.
price. So you got to consider, if we're moving a 15, 16, 17, like what's the cost there? Are we mortgaging the future?
Yeah, and that's a perfect way of phrasing that too, right? Because I am very anti trading first, like future first round picks. I feel like that's the most ridiculous thing any franchise could do, especially when a game like football is so heavily reliant on certain players being healthy. If you lose your
Exactly.
quarterback, like you
And
could
you get that
instantly
first
go
round.
from picking yeah, you instantly go from picking in the later rounds to picking in the top 10 just because you lost your quarterback. Not even maybe for the season, but like if you lose them for 8 games,
Right.
something crazy like that. So I'm never really pro, trading away future first, but if it costs you a future second or maybe a future third, I think the Lions have like 2 additional third round picks next year. So like they kind of have some ammunition if they wanted to move up, maybe not like I said into the high teens, but maybe in the later teens, 17, 18, something like that, where you're only jumping up 10, 7 to 10 spots maybe, then like you're still able to get one of those guys. um because I know how fans kind of think, right? They run their mock drafts and they're just like, oh no, this guy's gonna be there, and it's like, dude,
Never know.
you just never know. Like I think for me, I've been like really big on like the Kool-Aid McKinstry train about like how the Lions should like he be a perfect fit here. And the more I watch him, the more tape I watch of him. Alabama has like a really good like docu series on him where it's like 2 episodes of just him explaining like his upbringing and everything. I'm like, dude, he'd be a perfect Lion. And I'm just like, I don't know if he makes it to 29. I just
Right.
genuinely don't.
Yeah, and I think he fits perfectly into that category of players you don't know where they're coming from because isn't he's coming off a pretty significant injury? Am I remembering that
Yeah,
correctly?
foot fracture. Yeah, fractured foot and a or fractured bone in his foot. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where that could be like an Amir Abdullah type situation. You never fully recover from that, and so I've seen mocks with him going top 10. I've seen mocks with him going 50, 60. Right? You just never know.
Yep. Yeah, that's the thing that's going to be interesting. So like I think we're both kind of in the same agreement where it's like if the price tag is right, trading up would be great, right? And you know, trading down wouldn't be the worst case, especially depending on how the board looks, and obviously we would have to be able to reevaluate the haul that the Lions would get back if they were to trade back into like again the high, or low 30s.
Yeah, all I'm saying is if I gotta navigate the Woodward Avenue traffic at midnight, not having seen a Lions draft pick, I'm gonna be pretty pissed.
Same here, man. I'm gonna be a little annoyed. It's just gonna be like, you're gonna be just like having to like spend time with Lions fans and everybody trying to talk you into the fact like, no, this is a good thing. And it's like, I
Yeah,
know it's a good thing, but I just want to sit in my feelings for a little
my
bit.
cat is busy, right?
Exactly. Um, okay, so with that said, I mean, the next question I kind of have for us is going into this draft, I feel like our answer might be the same here, but if there's one thing that you're most confident about going into this draft, what would you kind of like put that at being for you?
I think for me, it's really like with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, like this is such a simple thing, but a lot of coaches and programs don't do it. They're going to pick a guy who fits their scheme. I remember, seeing a lot of years of Lions draft picks and mock drafts and even mid round, first round, whatever. They pick a guy and it's like, he's good. I don't exactly see where he fits into the grand scheme of things. That's been the opposite
Mhm.
for the Lions, where they're not afraid to take a guy who maybe wasn't supposed to go so high or maybe isn't a position of need, but you have a vision for how he's going to plug and play. And we saw that last year with Jameer Gibbs. I mean, that was absolutely, and we all talked ourselves into he's going to split time at wide receiver. But no, there was a vision for him. They executed it, still managed
Mhm.
to get David Montgomery into the fold with what they're paying him. And that is something that I really have a lot of admiration for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell for how they draft. Because no matter who it is, there's a vision for them. I have my reservations about Jack Campbell under that scheme, but I'll give that time to play out. But
Yeah.
overall, whoever it is that they pick, I trust that there's a plan in place, whether we know it or not, for them to hit the ground running and have a place on this team.
Yeah, and I think mine's is pretty much in that same vein, right? That whoever the Lions take from the first round to the end of the draft, that there is a clear vision for how that player is going to kind of work themselves into whatever the Lions need them to do. That there's a role probably already somewhat predetermined for each and every one of these players. Like you said, there's a possibility that like their first 3 picks in the first round, second round, and third round probably aren't like going to be seen as heavy contributors as far as starters, but hey, we're going to have you guys in rotation. We're going to have you guys part of very veteran, groups as far as like if it's an offensive lineman or a wide receiver, like we're putting you with some vets that are going to really help groom you to a point that when we do need you, you're ready to answer the bell, at any given point throughout the season. So I'm right there with you. There's as much as I was saying a little bit earlier, like the overuse of BPA is a little annoying. That is the thing that gives me so much hope with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell when they evaluate and pick players, is that that they're getting guys that have a specific role already set for them.
Exactly. Yeah, fully agree.
All right, we've talked to the most of the other draft stuff, but I did bring you on here for a very specific reason, and I want to give you enough time. We're already at like about 15-16 minutes, and I want to give you enough time to talk about the thing that you are most passionate about, and that's kickers. Last year the Lions had a little bit of a back and forth with their kicker battle. I mean, it's one of those things, like I think you said it perfectly a little bit a while ago. It's a question of like, is Dan Campbell so aggressive because that's just who he is, or is he aggressive because he doesn't have a kicker? When you look at this draft class, is there anybody in this class that could probably pique this regime's interest to be like, you know what, let's give ourselves a little more competition or just a little bit of an investment in that kicker position?
Absolutely. I think my number one guy is Josh Carty. I'm sure you guys saw me talking about him on Twitter today, on X.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably the most pro-ready kicker in this draft, and I think it's not particularly close. I mean, what was it, 2022? He went 100% from the field. It was a Lou Groza finalist. He was hitting from the 60s. Last year, I want to say he was like 85, 86%. He absolute monster leg on kickoffs. Like, there is not a kickoff he will touch that doesn't go maybe through the goalpost, if not the back of the end zone. I think, who was it? Mike Payton was pointing out earlier, the Lions were in attendance for Stanford's pro day, and he was the only one working out there. So it's quite telling, right? And then we saw on his Instagram the last couple of days, he has been traveling a lot, but the last couple of days he's been in Detroit. Today he was at the Little Caesars World Headquarters in Detroit, Michigan. And read into that what you will. I would not be mad one bit if the Lions spent some draft capital on him. Beyond him, though, because he's going to be a hot commodity, and we saw last year teams are not afraid to spend assets on a good kicker, a guy that they like. Saw that with the Niners, and then kickers and punters started going off the board real quick. But Cam Little out of Arkansas, absolute monster leg as well. He's got a pretty different build compared to Joshua Carty, whereas Carty's, obviously bigger, muscular. Cam Little's one of those guys who's pretty skinny, pretty lanky, just by the eye test, and he's got a monster leg. He's a little bit unpolished, but he, was from 60 consistently through the season. I'd like to see more consistency inside, where you watch his ball. He has a little bit of a hook on the ball that doesn't always translate great to the NFL, but he's been training a lot, especially out west with Nick Novak's kicking and consulting in San Diego, where a lot of the pros go all off season with his pro day prep, his pre-draft prep, and now just overall spending time with the other draft prospects, and he's putting in the work. So I'm sure we'll see him as a much more polished guy coming into camp, and that would be a guy who I think is really potentially a diamond in the rough. It's hard to say in the rough when I've given him as much on Lions Twitter as I have, but I think pro teams are going to look at him, see maybe not as polished as Joshua Carty, but if someone like Carty's off the board, like with the amount of nuance that I don't know if nuance is the right word, the amount of just effort that Cam Little's been putting into his pre-draft prep with the right crowd, I think he will come in a much more polished prospect to whatever NFL team gets him than what we saw out of college.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing, if the Lions do decide to go kicker, is it finally gets you, like I would say, a new crop of competition, right? Like we've seen the Lions kind of go through this back and forth of trying to sign kickers that have been in the NFL a while, that have that NFL experience, and it just hasn't been consistent enough. Maybe they're good within the 40s or 30s, but they're not taking enough pressure off this offense in regards to like, hey, if we get you within like 51, 52, 53, we should still be able to have enough confidence to be able to trot out somebody for a couple of these kicks throughout a game.
Yeah, and I think to some extent we don't give Michael Badgley enough, credit. He did well the year before. They brought in Riley Patterson. I don't know what the deal was with that. They knew what they had in both kickers, still gave up assets for Patterson, and then he came back and obviously didn't make the cut. And midseason, they switched back to Badgley. Now, I think if you read into why they just brought in Badgley back to the practice squad rather than just having a full-blown kicking competition, it can go one of two ways. It's, hey, we know what we get in Badgley. Maybe Patterson wasn't what we thought we had coming back. So we're going with a safe option who will carry us through the season. Or it could be like, hey, we like what we have in Badgley. We don't even need to explore anyone else. But I'm really conflicted on what that signals. It could just be they didn't want to, bring in a wild card midseason, because we've seen in years past how that goes, especially after the Lions part ways with Matt Prater. But I would be surprised if the Lions still just rolled with Badgley, but maybe not as surprised as everyone else. Everyone talks about it as if it's a given they're going to try to upgrade, but I mean, Badgley did what they asked of him. He showed an ability within the low 50s as the season progressed. Seemed somewhat new, as if it wasn't there 2 years ago, but we'll see if that's enough for Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes.
And speaking of wild cards, I think there's another like local kicker that's been kind of catching people's eye over in the USFL that I think there's a lot of people that are clamoring for. And I'm kind of on board that train as well, if for no other reason, Hamza, just for the competition and just to kind of see if what we're seeing in the USFL can actually translate to an NFL roster.
Right. And I mean, with that, nothing's a given. And I think for Jake Bates, this is huge because you look at him, he's a guy who, if I'm recalling correctly, didn't have any made kicks in high school or college. You look at that, he can go to all the free agent camps, have the best agent in the world. He's never getting an NFL look. All it took was one game in the USFL or the UFL now, and he's there, right? He's going to be on a roster come August, and that's a guarantee. Now, as far as what we've seen out of him, he obviously has a huge leg, still somewhat of an early sample size. I'd like to see more over the course of the full 8-game season. That'll give us a better feel for things, especially when, the difference between a good kicker and a not so good kicker is maybe 88 versus 82% field goals made, right? So that's a lot of nuance. We need a larger sample size. But early indications are really promising. I'd love to see him, in a Lions uniform. I think that'd be really fun. But that's also a situation where I wouldn't hold your breath for that because remember, at the end of the day, a free agent. If the Lions go in the draft, that's something where you want a guy, he's available, you can bring him in. Now, maybe the Lions take that as, instead of spending a 5th rounder on a kicker, we spend a 7th rounder and pursue Bates. And, maybe a less polished guy like Cam Little can come in where we're still comfortable with him if Bates doesn't sign with the Lions, whereas keeps that door open. But at the end of the day, you like a guy, you get him. Same as any other position, D-tackle, corner, whatever. You don't sit and wait and have 2 guys on a second tier battle it out. So I'm hoping whatever the Lions do, they have conviction in it, and I hope they have a plan. And at this rate, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think going into, again, once we kind of get through the draft, again, the way this draft is set up and the way the Lions are set up as a roster, this would be one of those perfect years if you did want to invest in a kicker. I don't think there's really room to complain. Like if they decide to, like you said, if they decide to spend a 5th rounder or a 7th rounder, there's not going to be a lot of, there shouldn't be at least a lot of, complaining about the Lions spending those assets. And if they decide to wait until after the draft and they try to make their best pitch at a guy like Jake Bates, and that's the beauty of the NFL, that maybe you can just offer him more money than anybody else, and you offer him a nice contract to come in here and compete, then maybe that's enough to get him to stay somewhat local. But it is a position that like I said earlier, I don't think it gets enough attention until we're late in the season and we're looking at a postseason game. Where we're just like, man, if they had kicked a few more field goals, what would the outcome have been? But
right.
I'm right there with you. I hope whatever the Lions decide to do, they have conviction over it, and it is something that, like I said, at the very least, if it ends up being Michael Badgley again, awesome. But if it's somebody else that can possibly push and help us elevate that 3rd phase of football to another level, I'm all aboard for that as well.
Absolutely. And I think a great point to this all is whoever the Lions bring in, they're entering one of the better situations in the NFL, if not one of the best. Is when you look at Jack Fox is an elite tier holder. I think he's proven that the last couple of years. Like Scott Daly, good long snapper. He's had his fair share of misses, especially I think in 2022. Jack Fox, there was a point in 2022 where I said a few times, I think Jack Fox single-handedly saved Scott Daly's career with the Lions. Came back, had a good 23 before he got injured. The Lions re-signed him in spite of Jake McQuaid filling in quite well. So that tells you, like, they have faith in Scott Daly. He's going to come back. He's rebounded well. Jack Fox, being the monster that he is, he can come in for a guy like Bates, who, maybe doesn't have as many live reps. Maybe is when you look at he's a free agent kicker, you don't want to go somewhere where they're going to have a rookie holder punter or instability at long snapper, which
Yeah.
Just the general turnover, a lot of these teams, the bottom 10 to 15 punters in the league in any given year are going to be turned over. You don't want that instability going into a punter competition where you're going to have two different holders. You can come in, know Jack Fox is your guy, one of the best holders in the league, and that's going to be alluring to anyone, UDFA, free agent, draft pick, any kicker.
That is a really good point that I didn't even consider. So yeah, like I do. I think the Lions have the perfect setup, like I said, to explore a kicker in whatever facet that is. If it's drafting one, great. If it's trying to sign a high priority UDFA, I'm all for it. And if it's for, again, throwing a bag at Jake Bates and be like, hey, we just want you to stay in the 313 area code. Just come over, just come on down to Allen Park and sign this contract. Like I'm all for that as well.
Sure, he wouldn't mind it either.
Well, Hamza, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Like I said, we kind of put this together last minute. I'm super glad that I was able to at least get a chance to talk special teams with you and also get your insight into the draft as well.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Nah, man, anytime. We got to make this a more reoccurring thing. Maybe the next time we can have Morgan join us and have a really good time with the three of us as well.
Awesome.
All right, well, that's going to do it for today's video, guys. If you guys have any other insights, if there's anything that you guys are thinking about the draft, let me know what you guys think are the best case scenarios, the worst case scenarios. Also, if you're pro or con on trading up or trading down, where do you kind of sit on that? And if you want to also throw in the comment section below, what is the one thing that you are most confident in? I'm expecting to see a lot of Brad Holmes and a lot of BPAs. Let that be the case. And also let me know what you guys think about, where the Lions could potentially be going when it comes down to special teams and kickers. Are you in favor of them drafting one? Would you like to see them just sign a high priority one? And where do you sit on Jake Bates as a possibly being a future Lion as well? But with all that said, I'm Miko. He's Hamza. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we will catch you guys in the next one.